Chapter 24. An Unexpected Reunion.
Are you sure you're okay? I'm fine, Fluttershy. It's just a harmless side effect. Nothing's wrong. But I feel like it's my fault.
This short conversation, and numerous variations of it, had repeated no less than 6 times on the way back to Fluttershy's home from the Everfree Forest. After several hours of carving out those special wooden stakes, Zecora had decided that her work was satisfactory and gave Twilight the okay to stop. And Twilight had managed to make no less than 200 of those specialized trinkets for the zebra's sake, each one now stewing away in the alchemic vat in preparation for the designed purpose. The act of creating these items, casting that woodworking spell over and over again, did have a physical effect on Twilight, though. One that was very hard to miss, even if you weren't looking for it. A consistent flow of steam wafted about her horn for about half of the walk back from the woodland cabin, a visual indication of just how much magic had been pumped through it today. It didn't hurt or burn or anything like that. It was just the magical equivalent to exhaustion, more numb than anything. If someone runs for several hours, for example, they're going to get tired. If someone casts the same spell over and over again non-stop for several hours, there's going to be a buildup of excess heat and residual energy. It wasn't painful. It wasn't dangerous. It was just a natural side effect of the task Twilight had put herself through. That didn't stop Fluttershy from thinking that she'd caused Twilight to injure herself, though. And for almost the entire walk back, she'd continuously apologized and inquired about the state of her horn, making no end of offers to try and alleviate the agony that Twilight was in. If nothing else, Twilight was at least happy that Fluttershy had found something else to occupy her thoughts with after that story of hers. Twilight still felt guilty for making her relive that experience, and wanted to do something to try and make it up to her. But figuring out what could do that was a task even Rockhoof would struggle with, and Twilight already had her plate full with this Nox business. Well, getting that problem solved and sorted was probably a start at making amends with Fluttershy, at least for now.
See? Better already.
Twilight practically sang as she pointed to her horn, no longer enveloped by that thin layer of mist.
If you insist.
Fluttershy did not sound convinced, gently pushing open the back door to her home for her guest to enter.
So, what now?
Spike asked after remaining silent for the whole of the walk back, a potent reminder that he'd been present for the day's events.
We just kind of left. Were we supposed to do something? It'll take some time to get the barriers ready, and Zecora should be able to take care of that on her own.
Fluttershy made her way to the kitchen sink and began preparing a glass of water for herself.
After that, I guess we just put them in place and hope it works.
Twilight sharpened her gaze.
And if it doesn't? I don't know. And I'd rather not think about it.
Fair enough. Twilight hid a grimace as she sat down at the table. There was a lot of faith going into this plan of Zecora's, at least as far as she could tell, and it didn't seem prudent to sit here and start poking holes in that faith. If it didn't work, they would deal with it. They'd find another way. But that was a bridge Twilight would cross when she came to it. For now, she just needed to try and formulate a plan for dealing with Nox.
I think we're going to head on out,
Twilight explained, and offered her saddlebags to Spike. He caught on quickly, and soon hid himself away in the enchanted pouch for the short walk back home. Fluttershy's ears perked up at the statement, hurriedly finishing her glass before turning back to respond.
Are you sure? You don't have to leave if you don't want to. Not to be rude, Fluttershy, but it's been a very long day. For both of us, I assume, and it isn't even 1 PM yet.
Twilight took the time to make sure her bags were securely fastened to her robed back, doing her best to adjust her wings without giving away the fact that she had them.
Besides, I have work in the morning, so I need to figure out what I'm going to do about Nox.
There was a short-lived moment of defiance from Fluttershy, but she dropped it before even making the attempt. She couldn't argue with Twilight's reasoning and gave her guest permission to take her leave. There wasn't much that she could have done to stop Twilight, but the sentiment was appreciated. There was a lot to be done today in order for tomorrow to go smoothly, and Twilight wanted to get out of Fluttershy's hair as quickly as possible to do just that. After a quick session of so-longs and farewells, Twilight made her way towards the front door and stepped out into the outside world. Or at least she would have stepped outside if a sudden and unexpected hoof hadn't struck her face the moment she opened the door.
Twilight?
Pinkie was just about as shocked as Twilight was at the sudden reunion, albeit in less physical pain than Twilight was.
I'm so sorry. I was trying to knock on the door, not your face. Honest.
That didn't stop it from hurting, something that Twilight was very well aware of. She had taken hits in her time from several sources, but nothing ever compared to getting struck in the face by an earth pony. Intentional or not, they were ponies known and famed for their strength, and Pinkie was no exception if that accidental punch was anything to go off of.
It's fine.
Twilight meekly rubbed the newly acquired sore spot on her snout in some effort to soothe the pain. It wouldn't leave a mark or cause any permanent damage, but boy was it sore right now.
Accidents happen. Ow. But they shouldn't happen. I should have been more... Wait a second.
Pinkie stopped in the middle of her frenzied apology and gave Twilight a skeptical glare.
This isn't your house. I should have punched Fluttershy in the face just now. What?
Fluttershy had chosen a very poor time to enter the conversation and was understandably upset by the implications of Pinkie's words. She shook like a leaf, her face becoming partially hidden behind her mane from the gesture.
Why am I being punched? Hypothetically.
Pinkie answered with little acknowledgement of the Pegasus. Instead, she continued to stare sternly at Twilight. And when next she spoke, her voice was just as stern, almost as if she were interrogating the cloaked pony. She leaned in with heavily squinted eyes.
So what are you doing here anyway? Is something going on? Nothing of significance. Just visiting a friend.
Twilight found herself a little intimidated by Pinkie, if only because the concept of personal space was becoming less and less relevant with each passing second. She could practically feel her breathing on her. They were so close.
Is there something wrong with that? I guess not. But you never come visit me.
It was Twilight's turn to furrow her brow.
What are you talking about? I see you all the time. We got coffee together on my way to work. Fair enough.
Pinkie swiftly returned Twilight's personal space with a shrug.
Past couple of days have just been weird, though. I feel like I've been sidetracked in favor of more important things, you know? It has been a busy weekend, I'll give you that.
It really had been, looking back. In just 3 short days, Twilight's entire perspective of her employer had changed. She had learned of things that nobody had any reasonable way of learning, and she had gotten herself involved in a tangled mess that still had yet to be unraveled. It was amazing how all of it had happened in just 3 days. The Friday afternoon when this all started felt like it had been months ago at this point.
Oh, you too, huh? Yeah, it's just been a kind of blah few days, huh?
Pinkie asked with a cheery giggle, sticking her tongue out with an overdramatic eye-crossed expression alongside the word bleh, before returning to the giddy smile. But the happy look on her face was murdered shortly after by a wide-eyed look of horror.
But we can talk and worry about that later. Fluttershy, we're going to be late!
Twilight looked back to Fluttershy for some insight on Pinkie's slightly odder than usual behavior, only to see that she was just as confused. This got Pinkie to roll her eyes in frustration.
Huh? What day is today? Sunday?
Pinkie slowly spun one of her 4 hooves in a small, circular motion, as if prompting Fluttershy to keep going.
Sunday the what? I think it's the 2nd? Yes, today is Sunday, June 2nd.
Pinkie almost laughed out before returning to a more serious demeanor.
Now, who sent a letter saying that she'd be back in town on June 2nd? Around now-ish, if the trains are on time.
By this point, Twilight had figured out that these two had prior engagements to attend to today. Whatever those were, she didn't know without being told. Looking at Fluttershy's face revealed that she might have been in the same boat. Her eyes glanced about the room as she tried to remember, lightly chewing her bottom lip in frustration about having forgotten something seemingly so important. The few short seconds where Fluttershy took the time to think seemed to drag on forever for a certain pink pony, her impatience growing more and more apparent with each tick and tock on the clock. And then, finally, the bell was rung and Fluttershy donned a look of sudden, shocking clarity.
Oh, I completely forgot! I need to go pick up the cake!
The Pegasus skittered about for a moment, not sure what to do or where to go for a few seconds. It didn't take her long to make a hasty decision, scooping up her own saddlebags and quickly making a beeline for the door.
Harry, feed the chickens!
That was the last thing she said, before she brashly rushed out of the house, taking care not to rudely bump into Twilight or Pinkie on her way out. And with a few flaps of her wings, she was gone just like that.
Okay, good. We are back on track.
Where Pinkie had been keeping the clipboard she was suddenly looking at was a mystery Twilight would never solve.
Still say I should have been the one to take care of the cakes, but whatever, it's fine. I'm not even mad. It's not like baking gives me life or anything. So what if my last cake ruined last year's get-together? Everyone makes mistakes. I was having a bad week.
She was muttering to herself at this point, with more bitterness and sarcasm than Twilight had ever heard from her. It was unsettling, really.
Wait a second. Last year.
Pinkie suddenly looked towards Twilight as if she had achieved true enlightenment.
That was before you showed up in town. An astute observation.
Twilight sarcastically chimed back in her head. She didn't say it out loud, though. Pinkie seemed upset enough by this cake business, so she kept it to herself. Not that she had the time to make it anyway, as Pinkie was quick to clasp onto the front of her concealing cloak with her teeth, and then pulled Twilight forward.
That means you two haven't met yet! Oh, this is gonna be great!
Pinkie's excited chimes came loud and clear despite her preoccupied teeth, and her tugging only increased in intensity.
You two are gonna love each other, I can tell! Pinkie, you don't have to pull!
It took a surprising amount of effort on Twilight's part to at least pry Pinkie's mouth away without hurting her. Difficult, but not impossible. As soon as she was free, Twilight took a few steps back to prevent her from grabbing her again, though no attempt was made. The unusual taste of magic had distracted Pinkie for just enough time, thankfully.
Sorry. Got a little carried away there. My bad.
The apology came, sincerely enough, alongside a pair of downed ears and saddened eyes. Something that Twilight had learned in her time in this town was that Pinkie got a little impulsive when she was excited like this. And the prospect of introducing Twilight to her friends was one thing that seemed to trigger this impulse a lot.
But if you're not too busy, I'd love for you to meet her. You two would hit it off in an instant, I can tell. I don't even know who her is, Pinkie.
Twilight calmly explained as she examined her cloak for any damage. Thankfully, flat pony teeth weren't as damaging as a wolf's, so there wasn't any real tears or anything to be had. Just a few minor wrinkles, and those would be smoothed over within the hour.
Oh, her name's... Wait, no.
A stern expression came over Pinkie's face, pushing her brow downward as she quickly thought things over in her mind.
First impressions are everything to her. She'd be really bummed out if she didn't get to introduce herself. It's what she lives for.
Whoever Pinkie was talking about didn't seem like the most down-to-earth person based on that description. Quite the opposite, to be honest. It sounded like the mare had quite the ego weighing down on her shoulders, or at the very least, a long list of self-esteem issues in regards to what others thought of them. In Twilight's mind, there was a 50-50 chance of either one being true, and in the case of the latter, she actually found herself relating to it, more than she expected. And this brief thought got her thinking, not hard, on her cloak, with a melancholy frown. This sturdy patch of fabric had served her well in concealing her true nature for almost as far back as she could remember, but now, all of a sudden, she began to deeply question the purpose of continuing to hold on to it. Sooner or later, it wouldn't be enough to keep her true form a secret. She was an alicorn, after all, and would eventually begin to express those traits more and more dominantly. Queen Celestia was, in essence, the template for what Twilight was eventually going to grow into as the years went by. Even Cadence had begun exceeding the average pony's height just a few short years after her ascension. Twilight had been lucky this far in her life, maintaining the standard body type of the common pony, but how long, really, would it last?
It's inevitable.
The words rang in Twilight's head like the gargantuan bells held within the various clockwork towers spread around her hometown of Canterlot.
Just like... Twilight?
Pinkie's voice shattered the labyrinth of thought that Twilight had trapped herself in, causing her to flinch at the sudden acknowledgement.
Are you okay?
Every other emotion Pinkie had displayed so far was gone, replaced only with this frightened look of worry and concern. Twilight didn't know why. She didn't even know how much time had passed since she had let her thoughts run away with her. She cocked her brow in confusion.
I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be? You're crying.
Shocked, a purple hoof found its way to Twilight's cheek and quickly pulled back. Sure enough, the smallest traces of moisture were present, evidence that tears had been rolling down her cheeks. She'd begun crying just out of the blue. All of it linked back to the mere idea of a pony with self-esteem issues.
I guess I was just thinking too much.
Twilight wiped the trace remnants of tears from her face.
Touched on a touchy subject. I'm fine. I don't think you are.
Pinkie droned back in an upset manner.
It's not healthy to bottle everything up. Trust me, it leads to bad things. If you want to talk, I'm here to listen.
There was absolute sincerity in the way Pinkie was presenting herself, and that offer right now. And that struck a chord deep within Twilight. Those had been words she had been longing to hear for 6 long years. Even if she had long since repressed those memories and desires within herself. There was so much that Twilight just wanted to blurt out right then and there, if only because those choice words had been used, but now wasn't the time or place for that. And while Pinkie was a trusted friend at this point, Twilight wasn't sure if she was ready to just dump all of that on her. She wasn't even sure if Pinkie would be able to handle it. So instead, for now at least, Twilight decided to divert the topic once again of her own volition. There was already too much going on in her life right now. She didn't need to add drama from her past into the mix. So a brave front was put up, alongside the happiest smile she could muster.
I just need to take my mind off it for a bit, that's all. How about we go meet that friend of yours? Aren't we going to be late?
Pinkie stood there for a little while, the same inquisitive look from earlier once more worn on her face. staring deeply into Twilight's eyes as if to parse some hidden meaning from her words. It wasn't long before this look wavered, and Pinkie began to twitch and shudder. Just as her words had struck a chord with Twilight, so did Twilight's words for her.
Fine. Let's go.
Twilight donned a sly grin as Pinkie spun around and began trotting away. She wasn't 100% on board with another distraction being thrown her way, but it had been the easiest way to get out of this conversation. She magically pulled Fluttershy's door shut as she went to follow Pinkie Pie, but stopped when an almost accusatory hoof was suddenly being pointed at her.
But so help me, you are going to talk about your problems eventually.
Pinkie warned in a stern and almost wrathful tone.
I'm not the best with body language, but just now I could see that you've been bottling something up inside of you for a really long time. And I swear on the Queen's two hearts that she may or may not have, that I will help you through it, even if it kills both of us in a horrendously violent manner. Do I make myself clear? Sure?
Twilight meekly shrugged back, doing her best to keep her composure in check, underneath that unrelenting scowl being aimed at her right now. Just moments ago, the offer to listen seemed like a blessing, but now Twilight couldn't get that hopefully unintended death threat out of her head. The words horrendously violent stuck out to her in particular. Pinkie gave a sharp nod with a snort, before suddenly returning to her trademarked happy-go-lucky smile that she was known for, and she turned around and took off at a brisk yet moderate pace. That mare's talent for almost instantaneously changing her mood was something both astonishing and frightening, so much so that it gave Twilight a moment of pause before she hesitantly followed behind. This newfound distraction wasn't exactly a welcome addition to Twilight's schedule for today, but it was the easiest way to get out of the situation. But unfortunately for her, Twilight's house wasn't anywhere near the train station, so the courtesy of dropping off Spike was a no-go. He was stuck on this ride just as much as Twilight was, albeit in a much less direct way. And she made sure to at least give a quick apology back towards Spike when the opportunity presented itself, sneaking into a public restroom to do so under the guise of needing to go. Thankfully, Spike seemed pretty understanding of the whole thing. Besides, it shouldn't take that long, he suggested, so it would be fine. Or at least that was what he told her. He could have been lying. That thought poked and prodded at Twilight's mind as she kept trailing behind Pinkie throughout town. They walked at a reasonable pace that bordered on being just a little too slow, likely a result of Pinkie taking the time to overlook that clipboard of hers. Now, Twilight wasn't usually the nosy sort, but she couldn't help but notice that the document was some kind of schedule or plan. Probably. Most of the paper was covered in above-average quality crayon drawings that depicted some kind of get-together between at least 5 ponies. There were words scribbled onto the parchment, some circled with arrows leading to other words or images, but there was absolutely no way that anyone could call such a thing an agenda. Though, on further thought, this was probably something meant for Pinkie's eyes only, made by her in such a way as to maximize the space of the paper. That, or it was just to make her look more prepared than she really was. Also a valid possibility. Wasn't really Twilight's business what Pinkie was doing carrying that around, though, so she didn't ask. Something she found humor and hypocrisy in, seeing as how she had been sticking her nose in what was most certainly not her business for several days now. But contextually, it was different enough in Twilight's mind to justify her actions, at least at the moment, so she pushed it out of her head for the time being, and instead decided to focus on the external rather than the internal, just to clear her headspace for a moment. Ponyville was more active than it usually was, she noticed, with ponies rushing about this way and that in preparation for something. Streamers and banners of red and gold were being strewn upon buildings and street lamps, creating glittering archways and giving the city a far more festive look than it usually had. A common image that could be seen upon these various decorations was a depiction of a blazing sunrise, or a sunset, depending on how you looked at it. The meaning was subjective. It could be seen as the beginning of something, or the end. It was all dependent on your perspective. But this depiction of the sun was a special one, as were the decorations they were emblazoned on. An undeniable sign of the Summer Sun Festival that was to come within the month's time. A holiday observed most prominently in Equestria and the Crystal Empire, taking place on the longest day of the year. An all-day event meant to celebrate and welcome the new year that was to come with fun, games, and various other forms of jubilation.
End of the year already, huh?
Twilight took the time to appreciate the festive adornments as she kept on walking, finding it hard not to smile at the familiar warm colors associated with the national holiday.
Went by pretty quick.
Yet another thought that had to be thrown by the wayside before it could bear any fruit. Today was just looking to be as upsetting as it could be based on everything that was going on all at once. A frustrating fact that actually made Twilight look forward to meeting this mystery friend of Pinkie's. At least that would be something new. Pinkie kept true to her promise, though, of not divulging any information before the introduction, deflecting any and all questions asked of her. All Twilight was able to ascertain was that this was indeed a she they were dealing with, a pony who spent the majority of her time out of town because of her work. But every year, at around this time, she came home for anywhere from a few weeks to a couple of months at a time, and that was when the group of childhood friends got together for something of a reunion party. Of course, Twilight didn't need to wait long to figure out who this group of friends was, as it was about then that they had reached the train station. Situated a bit of a distance outside of town, just far enough to reduce the noise pollution from the heavy machines, the station looked to have a fairly busy day ahead of it. Ponies of all types and colors boarding and departing trains, some coming back from simple short trips, and others departing for much longer journeys. Further still in the distance was something of a freight yard, where various crates and barrels were being loaded and unloaded from trains in the ever-ongoing act of trade and purchase. But that wasn't why Twilight had followed Pinkie Pie here, so she paid it no mind.
Oh, thank goodness! We didn't miss her!
Pinkie blurted out happily as the two came up to their platform. There were other ponies here waiting for the train as well, but two in particular stuck out to Twilight. Rarity and Applejack were also waiting for this mystery guest to arrive. It didn't take long for them to take notice of Pinkie Pie, beginning to greet and catch up with one another in the beautifully casual way that only friends can. Twilight didn't pay any attention to the small talk, though, finding herself just a little unsettled by Rarity's presence. After everything she had learned, it just seemed odd to see her again. The snow-colored unicorn had been the victim of something truly horrendous, from what had been learned over this weekend, and she couldn't even remember it happening. It was unsettling. But Twilight did her best to try and ignore this for the time being. It didn't seem to bother Applejack any, and even though she wasn't there at the moment, Fluttershy would likely be showing up too.
Hi there.
The sudden whisper from very close by actually made Twilight flinch. Not enough to grab Pinkie's or Rarity's attention, but it was enough to earn a stern shh from whoever had just addressed her. That person turned out to be Applejack, her face dressed with the same worried look from the last time the two had met.
Sorry about that. Didn't mean to scare you.
Applejack apologized in a hushed tone, taking a short glimpse over to Pinkie and Rarity to make sure they weren't listening in on them.
And sorry for bugging y'all about this again, but have you... Yes.
The question didn't need to be finished for Twilight to know what was going to be asked.
I'm making progress. I haven't done anything yet, but I have a much better idea of what I've gotten myself into. Should I be worried about it? Because I am. I'm not sure. based on Fluttershy's story, he only seems to act if someone goes to the third. Fluttershy? She's in on all this?
The hushed whisper was almost loud enough to attract some unwanted attention, and Applejack noticed quick enough to settle back down.
She saw some things. Didn't get the memory charm.
Twilight explained drearily, remembering all too clearly how Fluttershy reacted to her own story earlier this day.
I got her to talk about it earlier, and I got what I needed. So please don't make her do that again.
What did she say? The answer to that question would never come. As soon the blaring of the whistle and rumbling of the heavy metal construct rolling along the tracks was all that could be heard. It was enough to bring Applejack out of the conversation, redacting her question as politely as she could before trotting off to stand with Pinkie and Rarity. It seemed that the mystery guest was about to arrive, and the three friends were getting ready to greet her. Applejack in particular could be seen fidgeting with her mane and hat in an attempt to make herself look a bit more presentable. The train rolled into the station just as normally as any other would, slowing to a halt with a grinding whirl. It stood there for a few short moments, all in attendance watching with wide eyes and silenced mouths, only just barely able to contain their excitement, as the doors slid open with a sharp and steamy hiss. And steamy is not an exaggeration, as a large cloud of steam was kicked up by the act of the door opening. The small crowd, Twilight included, all took a few steps back, either to avoid the steam or to allow the passengers more room to depart. But only one figure stepped forward through the mist. The first thing Twilight noticed was the outfit they were wearing, still partially obscured by the sudden burst of steam. A sharp blue jumpsuit, decorated with a series of yellow lightning bolts, the most prominent being the symmetrical jagged streak worn prominently down the chest. The uniform of Equestria's Wonderbolts, she quickly deduced. A faction of Equestria's military that, at some point, had also become something of a sports team, performing at any number of public events and whatnot in addition to their duties to Queen and country. The prestigious uniform was currently being worn underneath a well-worn aviator jacket and a set of weighty-looking saddlebags, evidence enough that the athlete had been released for some vacation time. But none of that mattered to Twilight as the steam cleared away, and the Pegasus's face finally came into view. A cyan-coated mare, roughly within Twilight's age range, decorated by a cocky smile and a dark set of older-style sunglasses. But that wasn't out of the ordinary. Ponies came in all sorts of shapes and colors. What really caught Twilight's attention was the Wonderbolt's mane. Only looking at the length and cut, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary, a bit ragged and messy, but intentionally so. Just a haircut. Twilight was far more preoccupied with the color, though. Or colors, to be more specific. Ponies with one or two colors in their mane were pretty common, and seeing three was a bit rarer, but still a relatively normal sight. But all 7 colors of the rainbow, evenly distributed throughout the head of hair? That was a very rare trait, and the number of ponies in Equestria who had it could only be in the single digits. And there was only one pony in the world that Twilight knew with this extremely rare genetic trait. And just her luck, this pony was the same one. There was no denying that fact. It was her. Of all the ponies in the whole world, it had to be this one that had to show up. The sudden and bittersweet reunion was made more so with the realization that Twilight had only just moments ago decided not to let drama from her past interfere with her present. Yet it seemed destiny was determined to make her time in Ponyville ever more trying than it already was. A thought that was only reinforced as the other 3 ponies quickly welcomed the mare Twilight never once thought she'd cross paths with again.
Welcome home, Rainbow Dash!